start the stream there for a bit, but
You were being censored. No, I'm kidding.
well, it was saying the quality wasn't good enough, and then it was sitting there at bad, bad, and then it finally went good for me. So, um, yeah. So I don't know if that's my computer or if that's YouTube, but looks like it is okay now, and we are good. Okay. So I guess this kind of works out where S-Man and Loudmouth can kind of act as moderators here.
Yep. So if Humane or Charlie start yelling, which I've never
Yeah, I'm
heard.
probably gonna go to bed in a minute, so
Okay.
Yeah, I'll moderate.
That's understandable. It is much
Yeah.
later than planned. So
Yeah.
so let me start by asking. So how much time do you have? Because I didn't want it to be. Do you have the entire evening, or do you have a time where you have to go?
I should be going in about an hour, give or take.
So we'll so it's almost 7 o'clock right now, but you do have up until 8 o'clock, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that you're not feeling like time constraint because we were supposed to start at 6, but sorry about that.
And I was also a little bit late, so I have to apologize for that as well.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So I'll moderate to keep make sure everyone has cool heads. So in the end, hopefully Charlie and Humane don't yell at each other. I've never heard.
I think if anybody, I'm going to be yelling at S-Man. How dare you moderate me? You're censoring me. You're silencing my speech. What are you, anti-capitalist, S-Man?
I had someone unironically one time say that S stood for socialism, and I've never been able to let myself live that down. It's too fucking hilarious. But
Okay.
so yeah, so I've never heard Charlie yell. I'm pretty sure I'd hear a voice crack, but
All right.
I could just see it right now.
You give me too much credit.
Okay. And so even though I kind of said like an Oxford style, this is not a formal debate in that we're not given time periods and rebuttals and cross examinations. It's just, but I will let you have the floor to begin with because you contacted me on my DMs asking about a situation about what I believe statists think and what you think. Or what your perspective is when it comes to that. Or not statists, sorry, socialists. Wow.
Sure. Yeah. I was hoping for that clarification because I actually would not consider myself to be a statist. But yes, we would all do well to review how we got here. I did message you in Twitter DMs about something you had retweeted and that I took a little bit of issue with, and I wanted clarification on what you actually believed. And I actually I had no intention of continuing the conversation beyond just a simple yes or no answer to the question of if you actually believed what I was asking you if you believed. But
okay. Yeah, and I was just scrolling it so make sure that I've got it pulled up. So this
right,
is yeah. So it was a post from Bastiat Rules. And he said, socialists hate the West, socialists hate Christianity, socialists hate individualism, socialists hate creativity, they hate freedom. What are we waiting for to qualify socialism as a hate group?
Yes. And my objection to this is twofold. One is sort of an ad hominem objection regarding I'm not sure how you can reconcile referring to yourself as a libertarian or an anarchist when you seem to be advocating for the criminal persecution of people with views like mine, or people who describe themselves the way I do. So that would be my first and less serious objection, so you can address that if you want.
Well, classifying a group as a hate group doesn't mean that you want the government to, make laws against them or that sort of thing. It's just recognizing them as a hate group. The KKK is a hate group, but they're allowed to legally exist. There is no government persecution of the KKK. The KKK is allowed to hold rallies, but you have to recognize, okay, this is not a peaceful group, this is a hate group.
Well, I don't see why it should be. I mean, everybody hates. Every individual has a set of things which you could say that they hate. So how do you? I mean, I just don't see how. What is the point in labeling them a hate group? Is it just for the acknowledgement? I don't see what the point is of making that initial acknowledgement if you're not going to take some kind of action about it.
Well, the point of the acknowledgement is so that people stop praising it as some, like, so the Westboro Baptist, like, if people were, saying, oh, we need to follow the doctor, these guys are good guys, we need to teach them in school and all that sort of, well, then you're like, no, these guys are ultimately harmful to society, they preach nothing but hate, these people need to be set aside as, like, no, they need to be labeled as the dregs, right? Because, like, so when you're in a discussion with somebody, what happens when somebody shuts down conversation, they do it by calling the other party a Nazi or KKK or a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or Islamophobe. Those are specific categories that are saying to everybody else, hey, these guys are not good, stop associating with them. You are being a member of this not good group, so we should stop associating with you and stop listening to you. And that's essentially what would happen if socialism was viewed in the same kind of like, oh, wait, I'm a socialist, and that means I'm the bad guy, so people should stop listening to my ideas and stop preaching my ideas as if they are salvation or... Because, I mean, not Marxism is taught in schools, like, oh, everybody needs to get behind this, and I'm like, the system that has led to over 100 million deaths within the last decade, not during times of war.
Well, I would object to that claim also, but we'll probably get there eventually.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Okay, so the idea is if they are a hate group, you could say you're a socialist, and then people would understand, oh, this guy is out of his mind, or like that. It needs to be viewed as a pejorative in the same way the Nazis, like, hey, if someone says you're a Nazi and everybody agrees that you're a Nazi, you probably aren't the good guy. Now, the problem with that is eventually the term gets watered down and you start calling people like Brittany Pettibone a Nazi, and you're like, she's
right, who's
not a Nazi.
Who's to determine what is a Nazi, right?
Yeah, then it becomes kind of a meaningless term when people just say it in order to shut down conversation, as opposed to, hey, you are acting like this. Okay, so here's a better example than, say, Nazi. Pedophiles. That's generally... I've seen people on the left and the right condemning pedophilia, well, with the exception of maybe Slate. But if you say, hey, this person's a pedophile, everybody looks at them with disdain and like, okay, I know exactly what you are. You stay away from me, buddy, that sort of thing. And that's what... It's the... That would be an accurate... Like, if somebody's actually, raping children, they should be viewed with disdain. They should be viewed with, like, okay, this person is not allowed in our society. We're not going to treat them fairly, sort of thing.
Right, but you wouldn't classify pedophiles as a hate group, though.
No, because it's already viewed as something not... as a... What's a good word for this? As a deplorable group.
Yeah, there's a social stigma to it.
There we go. Yeah, there's a social stigma, and there should be a negative social stigma to socialism.
Okay.
That's why we would label a hate group, to add that social stigma. Like, yes, these guys, doesn't matter if they think they're in the right, ultimately what happens is bad, which we need to view it with that negative social stigma.
Okay, and I think it's ultimately not a fair view. It's not a fair treatment of my views and from my perspective, but I respect that you feel that way given your perspective. And I would, because to me, my initial interpretation of what I read into your retweet of this tweet is that essentially you would want socialists to be treated the same way that, say, Nazis are being treated right now, or just alt-right people in general are being treated right now on social media, for example.
Yeah, so, well, as far as social media, ostracism, that is the correct, like, okay, you are a crazy person, we're not going to deal with you. we're not gonna. It's not. We're gonna tell people to avoid you. That sort of thing. That I understand completely, and I agree with that. But the punch a Nazi, no, that's not a position that I can get behind. And I've actually, it forces me to defend idiotic Nazis by saying, no, you can't just punch them because you disagree with them. And I've had to defend people like Richard Spencer, who he's he is absolutely like the stupidest famous person outside of Ocasio-Cortez. Like, it's like, dude, how do you get to your adult life without thinking clearly? Like, when your thoughts are that muddled and idiotic and contradictory. He will contradict himself from one sentence to the other and then contradict himself again and not even realize this, and people aren't calling him out on his bullshit. And, like, I've had to defend him because I'm like, dude, even though he's an idiot and this stuff it cannot possibly... It doesn't match reality because he's contradicting himself and saying things like that. But then you have to be like, well, that means we need to punch him in the face and we can hit him. And he's like, dude, no, you guys are... That sort of thing is too far. Now, even though I think socialism is ultimately an ideology that is harmful, as far as punch a socialist, no. That's not how you solve things. That's only going to make socialists more ingrained and more adamant that what they believe is the truth. You don't beat bad ideas with violence. You beat bad ideas with good ideas and with ostracism. I
think it goes both ways. I think bad ideas can be just as easily defeated either way. It's really a question of which can be morally justified in any given situation, and that's a more complex issue. But
well, you don't beat bad ideas with violence. You create martyrs with violence.
You can also create martyrs with violence. You can also contest bad ideas with violence. Or at least you can contest the people who are willing to espouse those bad ideas with violence. Which is not to say that that's always necessarily the optimal thing to do, but you can do that.
Okay, saying you can do that as in it's something you physically can do, sure. Like, what... I mean, you can jump off the Empire State Building.
No, that's not the sense in which I mean. I mean, you can do it and it'll still work in some instances.
No.
You don't think there's any instance in which violent resistance to bad ideas will serve as an obstacle to the propagation of those ideas?
No, it makes those ideas flourish.
I don't think that's true even of people who espouse bad ideas violently persecuting people with quote-unquote good ideas or neutral ideas. So, I mean, there was no resurgence of Judaism after the Nazis violently persecuted Jews, for example. Of course, Judaism...
What?
That's just a fact.
Do you not realize that Judaism is still around, right? And in fact...
It didn't... Yes, but well... Okay, but it didn't...
Are you aware of the Holocaust, right? And of...
No, you want to inform me about it?
Yeah, well, it's not even something... It's common knowledge, the Holocaust, right? It
Sure.
goes to the fact that you can't even question the number of people who died in the Holocaust without being labeled a Nazi. And you're like, it's gone the opposite way. Where now there are more Jews than there have ever been, and not just people of the Hebrew ethnicity, but people who are actively practicing, because it led to the development of the state of Israel, and people flocked to there as a religious... Well, Mecca is probably not the right word, but actually Mecca. It is... People take pilgrimages there to the historical Jewish religious sites. It has actually increased the number of practicing Jews as opposed to eliminating it.
Well, I don't think it's increased it as a proportion of the population.
Proportion of the population, yes. Judaism has increased as a proportion of the population since... Because if you look at the number of Jews as a part of the population prior to World War II, I don't know if there's actually statistics on this, but
I'm sure there are.
It's
I'd be
interesting
interested to see them
yeah.
because I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I don't think that there are more Jews now as a percentage of the population than before the Holocaust.
Are we
Okay.
I
talking
could be
about Jews
very well be wrong.
as the ethnic heritage or Jews as in Judaists, like the religion?
Well, for me, what really matters in terms of making my point is the number of people who actually practice the religion.
No, wait. I think we're looking at this question, though, entirely wrong, because you said it would defeat the ideology, and yet, even if it's...
No, I didn't say it
population
would.
hasn't grown...
I'm sorry, I must clarify. I did not say that it would. I said that it can. And that if the Nazis had succeeded in completely eliminating the Jews in Europe, you likely would not have seen, even if there has been some kind of resurgence in the modern day, you would not have seen any resurgence whatsoever, and that doesn't have anything to do with the merits of the ideas being challenged, or proposed for that matter. Espoused, rather.
Alright. Actually, that would actually lead to a decrease, but that seems odd.
By the way, I'm just going to be tuning in and out of the stream because I'm also in the middle of folding my laundry.
Okay.
Fair enough.
See you later.
That doesn't even seem possible. So, according to this Washington Post article, there were 16 million Jews prior to World War II, and now global. And this is talking about. I don't know if this is practicing Jews or if this is just the ethnicity.
Right.
Now it's saying that there's only 14 million as of 2014, and I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that those numbers are off. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But
See, I would have actually thought the number today was lower than that, which is why I was surprised when you said that there are like more Jews now. I was like, I don't think that's the case. But whether or not there are or are not is largely irrelevant to the point over which we're disputing, because you had said that it's essentially a given that if you violently persecute ideas, those ideas will become martyred and they'll resurge in society, and that clearly has not happened in the case of Judaism.
Okay, well, it has definitely happened in Germany. So I'm trying to figure out the exact numbers worldwide, but then again, figuring out the exact numbers is a bit odd because I have seen people tracking the actual numbers, and so supposedly 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust, and I've seen figures where they're saying there weren't even 6 million Jews in the world prior to the World War II, so that doesn't make any sense. And so I'm looking at these numbers and I'm like, they're saying there were 16 million of them prior to World War II. Where are they getting that 16 million number from?
Well, where are you getting the number from? What are you looking at?
Oh, I was just looking at a Washington Post, but I don't.
Oh, okay.
That was just the first article that came up. The only thing I could see right now is there's a 8.7 million in Israel, but yeah, that's so. I will have to look into that, but because I might be wrong on that.
It's ultimately of little consequence because it's. I just don't see how you can accept the.
Well, okay, so after Blue Republic Jr. Okay, sorry. So after I don't get what that's a reference to. But
apparently I'm also blue.
Okay,
it's just a joke. I don't know.
So
sorry.
So after the end of World War II, Germany, right? So they were persecuting the Jews, and the population of Jewish people in Germany, I do know this for a fact, is now higher than it was prior to World War II.
That would not surprise me.
There are more active Jewish people in Germany now than there were before Hitler's persecution of them in Germany.
Okay, but as a total of the, as compared to the total number of Jews that there were before, it's ostensibly lower, which seems to work against the point that you're making.
Okay. But no, so okay. the number of people who practice an ideology is different from the ideology continuing,
Well,
right?
in
Like,
some
'cause if
abstract sense, yes, but
like,
what is an ideology
what-
without people to practice it? In
'cause
what sense does
but
it
you were
survive without?
saying, you were saying that you could defeat an ideology with violence. In which case, that doesn't seem to be the case. So another example of an ideology being attacked by violence, persecution of Christians as well, where they were persecuted by the Romans. This is the gladiators. They were thrown into the gladiator arenas and fed to lions, buried up to their necks and fire ants. And Christians are now one of the dominant religions of the world.
Yes, I'm not saying that can't happen. You are saying what I'm saying can't happen, which is that if an idea is met with violence... Think about how many ideologies and religions and mythologies there have been that will probably... that either we will never know about, or the only reason we know about them is because of extensive and rigorous archaeological, exploration, so to speak.
Yeah.
For the record, I don't think I recall HUMANE saying that could not happen. I could be wrong, but...
Okay. So...
I mean...
Alright, so a actual incident of this has occurred to me. So the Mayan religion. Nobody practices the Mayan religion to the best of my knowledge. I mean, there's people who have researched and that sort of thing, but yes, the Mayans' ideology was wiped out by imperialist conquistadors. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow, that's... Okay.
Well, it just seems like a petty point to be quibbling over. Like,
yeah, violence can kill an ideology. Ugh.
Okay. Like,
but man, here's the other thing: is the people who have researched their belief system and their religion, even though they know about it, haven't adopted it. Right.
In the case of the Mayans, you mean?
Yeah.
Presumably, there are. I assume there are very few people who are practicing the Mayan religion.
It's preserved as historical, but nobody's acting like, oh, hey, this is something worth keeping around, and I'm going to start sacrificing children on an altar to Quetzalcoatl.
Right.
It doesn't.
And in that way, you might argue that the ideology has largely been defeated in every way that matters, and it was defeated because it was violently suppressed.
Okay. And it hasn't continued because it was a bad ideology. Now...
Well, that's... You may assume that that's the reason why, but I would not be so confident in saying that.
If it was a good ideology, when people found out about it, they would have resurrected it.
I have a question. Like, I guess the ultimate question here is it a moral thing to be taken, to be thought policing, to be, taking away people's rights of thought, or more specifically, of belief?
All right, let me clarify. When you say thought, you're saying THOT?
No, yeah, because I got my mind in the gutter, and I have my porn browser up here on the second screen. Yeah. Actually, no,
thought policing is reporting Brittany Venti to the IRS.
THOUGHT. Thought, that kind of thought police. Like policing people's beliefs to the extent that you use force. Like, is that a right that should be taken away? Is that a moral thing to be doing?
I will let you go first. Because you already started, but was there more to that thought?
My entire response to that is no. That's not okay. It's not okay to be policing people's thoughts. No.
Wait, what? What are you talking about there? I'm like, wait, did I open up a tab that was... Wait, did I actually open up a tab that had something like that? I don't think so.
No, that was the joke.
Okay, I was about to say... See, because I've had stuff like that. I did that one stream where I accidentally streamed my email tab because I'd opened it up in the same window as Hangouts. So I'm like, oh, did I do something stupid like that again? Anyway.
HUMANE has this barber for you to see the porn tab open.
Yeah. Okay.
He secretly also has Jacqueline Glenn involved in that porn as well.
I have seen
no
the
one's
Twitter,
surprised, bro.
and it is. Yeah, I'm like,
No, I'm just making a past
No.
reference to how you were disgusted at Barbara kissing Jacqueline. But anyway,
yeah. If it had been something like her and Kasara, okay, I can get down with that. But Jacqueline Glenn, come on, she's a hack. Anyway,
She's been around forever, though.
yeah, she will copy people's videos and steal verbatim their videos, and then she gets, oh, I can't believe Vice copied my video, and I'm like, dude, really? Anyway, she's an idiot and a fake. Anyway, so, like, I get Barbara's friends with her, whatever. Anyway, so, okay, the idea of the thought police, which I'm actually surprised that you are against the idea of thought policing, because I don't know how, as a socialist, you don't see that you have to be a thought police at some point, right? Because
Why would that be?
Because you're going to have people who don't agree with your socialism, and they're going to actively fight against your socialism, which means you have to stop them from being capitalist in your socialist society.
My question was more related to the whole punching neo-Nazis for being neo-Nazis.
Okay. See, this is all sort of
capitalists for being capitalists.
Yeah, because you're bringing it back to the moral question, because we were actually before we were discussing whether it's effective or not, and I guess in some instances where you go complete genocide, then it would be effective. But I would agree that it is not moral to be violent towards someone because of their ideas, and I don't think it's not only do I not think it's moral, I don't think it's effective.
I would agree that it's largely not effective, as it happens, but I don't know that it's intrinsically immoral either. But it's also not really.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say it's not really what I wanted to talk about in this debate.
Oh,
but
I thought you said it was moral, but you're saying no, it's not. I guess maybe you're saying no, it wasn't immoral.
I'm saying I'm saying it's not intrinsically immoral, but it's not always moral to do that either.
So I was asking that question more specifically because we know that Charlie is speaking for punching neo-Nazis, but I'm not hearing him speak of doing thought policing on capitalists or anything like that.
Well, the argument is not really about punching Nazis, though. And I have my own. I'm rather unsettled on that question. I'm still working out my views on that, but if you as it relates to capitalists, certainly in the society that we live in now, I don't want to see capitalists persecuted for their ideas. That's just ridiculous, and I don't want to see it happen in my ideal society either. And I don't think that the hypothetical scenario brought to mind by HUMANe actually involves as much thought policing as he believes it would.
Well, I would say,
but that's also something that I was hoping to get into a little bit later as well when we discuss the substance.
Well,
because right now, theoretically, we're still on the subject of like what qualifies as a hate group and what to do about that.
Okay.
And where I was planning to take the conversation from there, and that's why I wanted to know exactly what is the point of labeling them as a hate group if you're not going to act against them legally or criminally,
or socially.
I would say acting against them socially, that is what I'm actually advocating for. Acting against them with the government, well, no, I'm not in favor of the government acting against anybody, because then the government's going to act against you, right? That's any tool you can use to beat your enemy can be turned on you. That's...
Sure, yeah. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So that's the problem with government is it's not loyal. It is a tool, and so whenever you use hey, let's increase the power of government so we can beat our opponents, and then next election cycle that power is turned against you and beats you. That would be if we. Yeah. So what would happen if socialists were viewed as a hate group, and then we tried to enact some kind of government regulation in order to respond to hate groups? Well, then you'd start seeing, hey, this group's a hate group and that group's a hate group, and it would label everybody a hate group, so that way the government could attack them.
And just to be clear, if that were the case, you would stand up for me, right?
Yeah, like if it would, against government, yes. Like, hey, I will unite in arms against the government with the socialists.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's, like, hey, when it comes to that, that's the entire the purpose of the Second Amendment. You know, that we have. Well, I mean, it's not the purpose of the Second Amendment, but it is the idea behind the Second Amendment, is that we have the right to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government, and from, not just tyrannical government, but any kind of tyranny. And if the government is acting against even socialists in a tyrannical manner, well, then I have to stand up for the people who are being tyrannized.
Sure, but that probably wouldn't be settled through anything related to the Second Amendment. I don't think we'd win that battle with guns. But
it's like people of Afghanistan seem to be doing pretty well against the most expensive military in the world, and they're using nothing but rifles and or like maybe RPGs, but
it's very true. They do have the territorial advantage.
Yeah, territorial advantage. So I mean, run to the hills, right?
Sure.
So there's enough mountain ranges in the United States. I mean, Montana's largely unoccupied, and a lot of mountain ranges, a lot of terrain that could work to the advantage of people being attacked by the U.S. government.
Wyoming as well.
And incidentally, Marxists, in large part, would probably agree with you on that specific issue, as in terms of as it relates to gun rights.
Ironic.
Okay. Yeah, that's gun rights. Yeah, because that seems a little counterintuitive, seeing as every regime that has ever tried to implement socialism and communism, one of the first things they did is they took away the armaments of the population to implement their systems.
You're right, that is interesting to note. There must be some disparity between you and I in what we ascribe that to. I would ascribe that to a lack of Marxist principles. You would probably, I assume, ascribe that to the logical conclusion of Marxist ideology.
Yeah, I would say that's a strict adherence to Marxism, because you cannot allow people to willingly accept Marxism. You have to force them, was the ultimate viewpoint, and you can't force a population that is capable of defending themselves against said force.
Well, incidentally, I don't think there's anything in traditional Marxist literature, which is to say Marxist literature that came out before, say, Stalin, which does advocate for the imposition of, say, Marxism as an idea from the top down on the part of the state. I'm unaware of any facet of socialist ideology that calls for that or even allows for it, really. It's true that there are plenty of regimes who have been nominally Marxist who have engaged in tactics like that in order to insulate their own power. That has obviously happened countless times. But in terms of the Marxist prescription for revolutionary social change, it's an absolute prerequisite that the proletariat is armed and that they don't have the weaponry with which they can combat, with which they can participate in the culmination of class struggle. It's important that they don't have those things taken away from them. And I would argue, this is getting a little weedy, but I would argue that in the case of, say...
The populations that were generally disarmed were not the so-called proletariat. Populations that were generally disarmed were the business owners. The bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. Those were the ones who were attacked first.
Well, sure, but I don't think gun ownership was granted any more leniently among the proletariat. Well, let's put it this way. The regime was no more lenient about gun ownership for the proletariat than it was for the bourgeoisie.
Okay, but in the the USSR, it was the proletariat that rose up.
Well, no, it was armed thugs claiming to be acting on behalf of the proletariat, but I would argue that that is not. I mean,
Where
the
did those
proletariat
armed
in
thugs
Soviet
come from?
well,
They came
were
from the proletariat, did they not? Were they because the Bolsheviks, right? They weren't an institution of the government. They were rivaling
not
the
originally,
government.
no.
They were those were the proletariat armed in a violent revolution against those that were in the separate class of the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. You're saying violent thugs, and I'm like, but aren't they out of the proletariat?
Well, no, well, okay, I should be more. You're right. I should be more specific there. They were being led by violent thugs. In the case of the revolutionaries, plenty of them were proletarian. Plenty of them were not. But also, that's of little consequence to me because once the supposed transition to a communist or socialist state had begun in Soviet Russia, the proletariat was no more protected from firearm confiscation than the former bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
That's my point. And that is the way in which it failed to live up to Marxist principles. There are a lot of other ways it failed to do that, and we can get into that. But
because if they had left them armed, then they wouldn't be able to force the will upon them. They wouldn't have been able to institute socialism. If they had been able to institute socialism without force, they wouldn't have needed to disarm anybody. Everybody would have willingly gone along with it. That doesn't make any sense.
I didn't quite absorb that. Could you repeat it?
Okay, so the Bolsheviks, they overthrow the Russian Empire, and they institute their own government. And then they disarm their own population, so that way they can institute policies that their population wouldn't agree with. Now, if their population was already going to accept socialism, why would they need to be disarmed?
At the point that the bulk of the population is resisting this idea, it is no longer socialism because it's not democratic and it's not the popular will. At that point, it becomes people who are claiming to represent the popular will, but who are actually acting against it.
But so if that's the case where the majority of the population doesn't agree, then why was there a revolution to start with? Because wasn't that what Marx claimed would be necessary?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying
the revolution? So the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, wasn't that what Marx was saying would be necessary to start with?
Well, he said a revolution would be look.
Yeah, he didn't mention the Bolsheviks by name, but he
obviously
said that a revolution.
But he also
so we have the revolution that he said would be necessary, and then following that, there's not enough people behind the revolution, so the people who initiated the revolution then need to confiscate the guns from the majority of the population and then institute their version of socialism.
Well, look, this is why I think you have to be very careful.
Sense.
Well, yes, Marx does prescribe a revolution, but more than being prescriptive, he is being descriptive, and I want to get to that later also. But
okay, so if Marx is saying that a revolution is required, but the majority of the population would have to be a part of it, then why would a revolution be required? That seems counterintuitive. If the majority of the population accepts socialism, why would there need to be a revolution at that point? The majority would just get their way.
Well, that would constitute the revolution. To me, a Marxist revolution, one that does justice to the ideas that you can actually find in Karl Marx's writings, don't really resemble anything that you saw in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917.
Yeah, and didn't resemble anything you saw in Stalin, didn't resemble anything you saw in Venezuela, didn't resemble anything you saw in Cuba, didn't resemble all of these guys, they call themselves communists and socialists, but they don't understand Marx, but people like you do.
Well, that is obvious. Sorry, what, Darkon?
Was Hugo Chavez done through violent revolution, or was it done through an election? Because I thought it was the latter, not the former.
Chavez, I believe, did not it was got into a political place through democracy, and then instituted.
Right.
Then banned, took away, confiscated people's guns, and then implemented his policies despite what people wanted.
And it did involve land and wealth redistribution. Yeah.
It
I would
seems like
also-
there's a consistent formula, and sometimes a revolution is required to start off that process, and sometimes a revolution's not. But it all seems to end in the same thing. And
Well, you also have to remember that there were no major Marxist revolutions before the Bolshevik one in 1917, and that really set the pace for what was to come. And it's really the Leninist model of revolution and of social transformation that I, as a libertarian socialist, take issue with. I don't think it has, in my interpretation of what Marx is saying, it doesn't actually have anything to do with well, the first thing to note about communist theory in general, and I think this is an important thing to note from the outset, is that communism is not an idea or theory in the abstract to be compared on its ethical merits to other systems of society and production. Not in the Marxist sense, anyway. In the Marxist sense, what?
I'm sorry, that's just... Don't compare it to other systems, but it's better. Just trust us. Like, how do we know it's better? You have to compare it with other systems.
Incidentally, I don't remember claiming that it was better, and I wouldn't talk that way about communism.
You have to compare it to other systems. Saying that you can't compare it to other systems means then why would people want that over other systems?
You can take the Soviet Union and compare it to say that that's communism, and then compare it to various other systems that have existed. That you can do. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying that communism, as envisioned by Karl Marx, is not an abstract idea that he's saying, oh, this is better than capitalism. He's saying, no, this is the trajectory of the history of economic and societal development given principles that I have derived from my analysis of history. Now, speaking as Marx, not me personally.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. In which case, then nothing needs to be done.
Well, that's a great debate within Marxism, actually, and that's why I sort of wince when people treat Marxism and socialism so monolithically, because there's quite a debate about that within the school of thought itself about exactly how much action you're supposed to take as a revolutionary and to what end. And to what severity, so to speak.
If it's going to happen on its own naturally, then no action. You
Exactly.
don't need to stop you don't need to take action for something that's already going to take place.
Sure, and there are schools of Marxist thought who actually believe that, and there are more accelerationist schools of Marxist thought who believe that you should support reactionary politics because it'll bring about the conditions which will lead to a revolution. So some people voted for Donald Trump. Some left-wingers voted for Donald Trump because they thought it would bring about the revolution, or they thought it would bring about the conditions for the revolution. So there's all sorts of nuances to the way that people interpret communism. But
it never occurs to them that maybe Marx got his analysis wrong. That maybe Marx...
It occurs to plenty of people, but it's not self-evident based on the historical records of regimes that have claimed to have been on Marxist principles, that the principles you can actually find in Marx are
I would say it should be more evident in capitalism itself. Because his primary criticism...
I don't think I understand your point.
So he started off by saying, here are all the positives of capitalism over feudalism. And then he started talking about, well, capitalism has its flaws, and he started analyzing some of the flaws in capitalism. And he's pretty freaking accurate when he's talking about downsides to capitalism. There are downsides. The problem is then he says that's why socialism will inevitably replace capitalism. That has never happened. And he's saying that these flaws within capitalism will grow over time, when in fact it's the opposite, where those flaws that are part of capitalism have actually decreased over time. So, which means that his inevitable prescription was that capitalism will fall apart and be replaced by socialism, because socialism, as far as I know, he doesn't actually outright say it's superior, but the fact that capitalism would be replaced by socialism and then socialism would then go on to become the new norm implies in itself that it would be superior to capitalism. If capitalism
by
defeats
virtue of
itself
its
and
being
socialism
adopted
doesn't,
largely by society, but like he's not weighing them on their like he's not taking the two systems in the abstract and comparing them on a moral or ethical basis. That's not what Marxist analysis consists
no,
of.
he's comparing them on an economic basis.
Well, no, it's
For the
not
most
even
part.
necessarily to say, oh, which of these is more efficient or which of these is more productive.
He seemed
To
to think socialism would be more productive and efficient.
Incidentally, but that's not the.
I mean, he spent a good.
That's not
he
why
spent
he
a
advocated
lot of
for it.
pages explaining why.
Correct.
So...
Yes. Quite. But that was not the basis on which he said that this would or should happen.
But it
he
was
also,
a good chunk of his books that, yeah, way too many pages on the. So, I don't. All right, sorry, I'll let you continue.
Well, all that I was going to say is that Marx, for his, sorry, I seem to have lost where we were exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's my fault for So we were talking. So I said you were talking about how he wasn't talking about socialism or communism being superior to capitalism on a ethical, moral, ethical or economic basis, and I wasn't sure where you're going with it.
I'm sure he probably does make some claims about that, but that's not the center of his analysis. The center of his analysis is that society and history develops in a given way, and that development is governed by certain principles that you can deduce from an analysis of history, and that given those principles, you can generally predict where the trajectory with which society will develop in the future.
Okay.
That is not to say that, but it is not because socialism is more moral or more efficient or more productive or whatever it is that he argues in favor of it.
So it's just inevitable.
It's simply that this is a historical necessity. This is what's going to happen in my prediction.
Yeah.
But it's also packaged with the Marxism as a philosophy is also packaged with an emphasis on action and the idea that human action is objective in the sense that it molds objective reality. And so that's where Marxism becomes pretty complicated. And I certainly would not claim to be an expert on it. And I must correct a statement you had made earlier when you called me an adherent to it. I actually don't identify as a Marxist or a communist, but I just happen to think that you are wrong about them. So
you're not a socialist then?
I am I would refer to myself as a socialist. I would not go as far as to call myself a communist or a Marxist. I do sympathize with Marxism. I can't say I come to the same conclusions as he does.
So where do you differ from Marx and communism
then? Because I'm not convinced that communism is a historical necessity. I just don't know.
Okay.
First of all, I'm not well read enough on the subject to say one way or the other, but also because I think it's pretty difficult to predict something like that to any reasonable degree of accuracy.
Right.
But
I would agree with you there.
But I would agree that there are principles you can make.
To think that you know what economic system is coming next when this economic system hasn't. At the time, capitalism had only been around for a few hundred years, and feudalism had been around for several centuries prior to that. And you're like,
but you have to remember,
usually things go. You're talking about systems that existed for thousands of years, and then you get to capitalism. It's been around for 200, but it's on its way out, and you're like, it just got here.
Well, sure, but you also have to remember how much reverence Marx had for capitalism's emancipatory, capabilities, its emancipatory faculties.
Yeah, it was almost half of Das Kapital, where it's talking about basically praising capitalism for. I was surprised. I was like, wow, this guy seems to get it. Oh, wait a minute. No, never mind. There's a second half of the book where, yeah, okay.
Well, it's interesting that that's where you started to have your grievances, but
At the second half, yeah. I'm like,
right.
well, it's like, I don't know if exactly the halfway point, but I just know that he starts off praising capitalism. He's talking about all these great things that capitalism has done and how it's. I'm like, yes, okay, I had this guy all wrong, and then he starts talking about. I'm like, oh no, nope, never mind.
Well, but what you have to realize there is that he's talking about the institutions that are intrinsic to capitalism,
Oh.
which will be outlived by the people who will have to live within that society, because that's in the Marxist conception of social transformation and of revolution. That is how societies change. The individuals that comprise the society essentially outgrow the restrictions that are imposed upon them by the dominant mode and means of production. And that is exactly what Marx predicts will happen with things like wage labor and commodity production as they exist under capitalism. The masses, the populace will outgrow those forms of production. They'll no longer be able to, that institution will be inconsistent and incompatible with the way that society ends up developing, and that the economy ends up developing. And again, I'm not really interested in arbitrating that question in this stream because it's very complicated. I'm not sure I know enough about it. But and we're also pretty diverted from where we were originally in the conversation.
Okay, yeah.
But it was an interesting tangent to go on, to say the least. But I guess that's what I would say about it.
All right, so if you're, I didn't realize we were down a tangent, but I guess I can accept that. So,
well, just because theoretically we're still on the tweet that you retweeted.
Yeah,
I wanted that to be the main focus, but
so you don't think so? I'm trying to establish the framework here because
sure.
I'm trying to figure out if you are in favor of socialism. And it sounds like you're following what Marx laid the foundation for and actually advocated for. But for some reason, you think that we can get there that you can get there without people fighting it, and that's where I don't understand. It seems to me that's a lot like Richard Spencer saying we can get all of the non-white people to leave the U.S. peacefully, and I'm like,
peacefully. Well, I think
possibly, but no, I think you're living in a crazy world if you think people are going to leave their land just because they're not of the right skin color. And I think same way the socialist, if you think people are going to give up on their capitalism just because, arbitrary reasons, you're going to have a fight on your hands.
But in the Marxist analysis, and again, I'm not a Marxist, but in the Marxist analysis, that's not why. The reasons why capitalism will come to be abolished are not arbitrary. It's because it's literally incompatible with the way that people live in society, which we're not at that. We're obviously not at that point yet. Obviously, things like wage labor and commodity production are still compatible enough with the way people live their lives that we're able to maintain a facet of social order. But Marx's prediction, and I'm unsettled on this question, that's why I'm not a Marxist, is I don't know if it'll play out the way that he describes that it will, nor do I know with any degree of certainty that his end, the end game, so to speak, of his communist theory will come to fruition in the way he perceived it to, if that makes sense.
But if you're not sure of that, then why are you in favor of socialism? That's what I'm saying. You would have to be sure that that capitalism was unsustainable and that it would need to be replaced by socialism, which it is like you're saying you're not sure of that, in which case then why not just keep capitalism?
Well, for now we're going to have to keep capitalism for a little while because it's just there's not a whole lot that you as an individual can do about it. I am an anti-capitalist in the sense that I view capitalism as a system of production and of social exchange to be an impingement on individual liberty and creativity and
Okay.
and
So
sorry,
if you think
got
that is
distracted for a second.
if you think that is the case, then you must think that socialism is a superior alternative.
Correct. I would claim that. But my whole point in emphasizing before is that Karl
and that's
Marx does
not
not
based
argue
on
that way. That's
Marxism.
why I'm not a Marxist. That's how I'm separating myself from Marxist. The socialist movement is a lot broader than just the Marxist school.
I understand that, but so what I'm not understanding is you think socialism is superior, which would fall under something that Marx would agree with. So the only issue that you disagree with him is he said it was inevitable. You don't think it is inevitable.
I don't believe in
think
historical necessities, no.
But you think that should be the direction we go,
Um,
right? So you think that we should abandon capitalism in favor of socialism?
well, yes.
Okay.
But I don't, the reason, again, why I don't call myself a Marxist is because I don't know that, but I'll put it like this. I'm not sure that communism is the end of history, for example. I'm not sure that, certainly what I advocate for, I would never claim it to be the final and total solution to human conflict, for example, which Marx would not claim it to be either, but the way that humans live in the world would be so drastically changed in his conception that it would essentially amount to the same thing. But I'm not so convinced of that.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't believe in historical necessity.
Okay, but do you think capitalism is killing people?
It's a difficult question. People are certainly dying under capitalism for reasons that I think they would not be dying if we had a socialist system. That's definitely true, in my estimation.
Okay.
Is that
So people are
capitalism
dying
killing
right
it,
now.
or can I-
Okay. So people are dying right now, and you think if we had implemented
Oh, they
socialism,
have
they wouldn't
voice.
die?
If they were in an analogous situation under socialism, they probably would not die, yes.
I think that's a little bit of a fantasy right there. Analogous situation just with socialism, and I'm like,
Well, right, that's...
that. Okay, if I was in my same situation, but I just happen to have $1 million, and you're like, okay, that doesn't make any, let's see what if there's another analogy that I can have like that. If I can have $1 million a year job, but I just don't have to put any work to build that, okay. Like, that's essentially what you are. I don't know if you realize what you're saying. That it's like, yeah, if I can have the same outcome, but without putting in the effort to get the same outcome, and you're like,
no,
that doesn't make any sense.
That's not what I meant by an analogous
I know
situation.
you're saying an analogous system, but with socialism, I'm like, well, in order to get what we have right now, we had to work to get it. But under socialism, they're saying we can have that same kind of outcome, but with everybody putting in, their equal share or taking out more than they're putting in. That historically has never worked. You never get the same results that way. So you'd never... the idea of having an analogous situation under socialism, you don't have any proof of that ever being even possible, and I very much doubt that would be possible.
And I would say you have good reasons to doubt that would be possible, but I don't think some of the reasons you have presented are necessarily sound. But
okay, I would say if you think people are dying unnecessarily right now under capitalism, and I'm assuming it would be by the millions, if not, or at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions.
Well,
that means you should be saying we need socialism now, not socialism 50 years from now, because that means, if you're talking about $1 million a year for the course of 50 years, it's 50 million people that died because we didn't implement your socialism.
Right, but I'm just trying to be pragmatic. Like, obviously, I think if we had if I had cancer right now, I think that my odds of surviving would be better if I did not have to pay for it in a capitalist system. So in that way, I would be better off. My chances of dying, in my estimation, would be lower if I lived in a socialist society, and I would rather have that right now. But for
But
the purpose of pragmatism, it's not going to work
okay,
that way.
so
We're going to have to
the
settle for
problem,
something less
okay,
than that.
the problem you have there is, so you're saying your survival rate would be better under socialism than it is under capitalism, because capitalism you have to pay for your cancer treatment, but that's implying that socialism would have your cancer treatment.
It
Socialism,
is implying that, yes.
I would say socialism is less likely to have any kind of treatment, let alone cancer treatment. So, in which case, then you're not like, so capitalism at least gives you, like, there is treatment that's available, but you have to pay for it. Socialism, there is no treatment available, so even if you could pay for it, it's not there, which is what we see in the form of bread lines. It's the capitalism, oh, you have to pay for your food, and that's punishing the poor because that's a large portion of their income goes to food. And you're like, but under socialism, you don't have any food to pay for, so how is that an improvement?
I don't think that if a socialist society was worth its salt, that would be the case. Now, perfectly understand that you're
that
inclined.
is the case. So, if you want a non-violent example of socialism, you need look no further than Plymouth Rock. Socialism was tried in the United States, and you can look up the background of Jamestown and what was the name of the? It wasn't Plymouth, was it? Just Plymouth. Because there's two settlements in the United States. One was Jamestown, where you've got John Smith and Raleigh, and then there's William Bradford, which I think was that actually, was it just called Plymouth? I don't remember the name of the settlement but those two settlements, both of them tried socialism. It wasn't called socialism at the time because they didn't have a name for it. They were trying these community economics. So what they had is they had a system where everybody would take all of the food that they had harvested and presented and store it in a central repository, and then people would take out whenever they needed food. And what ended up happening is they didn't have enough food to survive. And a lot of people, when you look at historical textbooks, they're like, oh, well, that's because they didn't know how to farm in the new land, and they weren't used to the weather. Well, not only that, but
they didn't have the material resources to produce the kind of mass abundance of
yes, they did
product. No,
they were already doing that in England.
In the 1600s, they had the material resources to produce as much fruit as we do today. No, you're telling me that?
No, whoa. Why would Why would you be comparing it to today? Compare it to England, where they have similar, if not worse, weather. Well, and they had food. They were producing enough food to support themselves in England. These were people who were farmers in England. Enough so that they were hired by merchant companies to go and create settlements in the New World. These are not people that they didn't hire just, oh, hey, you're homeless in England, come over to this. No, these were people who did this currently in England and did it well enough that they could afford to go to the New World.
Well,
the idea that they didn't know anything about agriculture.
It doesn't change the fact that the level of abundance they were able to produce with the material resources they had at the disposal at that time was not enough to sustain a socialist society. Now, you may argue there will never be enough of it in abundance or the ability to produce an abundance that will sustain that kind of society. We can have that discussion,
okay.
But in terms of but you pointing to say Plymouth Rock, the Plymouth colony in the 1620s, and saying, well, see, they tried this system where they are, where it's, first of all, that system would not have been socialism by my definition of it, and I don't think it would have been socialism by any serious socialist definition of it. But
it mirrored communes of today.
In what way?
And it was exactly like communes of today. The difference is communes of today can depend on people outside of their commune. There are communes in the United States with that central, hey, we put all our food together and we take what we need, and they have communities outside of that commune that they also depend on for stuff that they can't produce within the commune. Now, Jamestown didn't have anything outside of that commune, and it fell. Now, Jamestown, after their first winter where people starved in mass, with less people and less resources overall, they were able to produce more food because they switched from their system of combining all their resources and then doling it out to the from each according to their ability to each according to their need. I don't understand how you can say that is the mantra of Marx, and you're saying that wouldn't apply to Jamestown or Plymouth Rock.
Well, no, because
but
things
that is exactly the type
outcomes.
of system.
Literally, a central Marxist principle is that outcomes are always based on the material conditions that existed, like, before anything happened to produce that outcome. Say so, like the reason.
That is a fundamental flaw in your ideology, because that same colony with less resources and less manpower produced more food the next year, which is why they were celebrating their abundance of food at the harvest, which is why we have celebrations of Thanksgiving and things along those lines.
You could also argue that system of production was more efficient because it was more like what they were already attuned to, say. That is not a refutation of Marxism, in my opinion. Or of socialism, for that matter. But.
Okay, so it's something that they were more attuned to?
Well, because look, these people who founded those colonies in early America, in early colonial America, they were attuned to a certain system of production. Namely...
If you don't work,
whatever you're going to call the transition phase from feudalism to capitalism, they were that is the system of production that they were
usually
living
called
under.
Mercantilism.
Sure, yeah, I'll accept that term, and that essentially living under that system essentially formed those people into what and who they are, and so the fact that a system that they lived under, that people who lived in a system that they were already more attuned to were more successful is not really that surprising to me, and nor is it a refutation of Marxism or socialism, because what Marxism and socialism suggest is that people will be more attuned at the coming of the revolution. They will be more attuned to living in modes of social organization that are rooted in solidarity and cooperation than those that are defined by individual profit incentives. And that's why it'll be that's why it won't be unstable, and why it would be if you just try. It would be more unstable anyway if you just tried it right now.
But
in these circumstances,
look at what the people who were in charge and who were living in those communities were saying. They were in solidarity. Do you think they wanted to let a large portion of their population starve to death? No, they wanted this to work. They wanted to help as much as possible. The problem was when you have when responsibility is distributed to the group, what happens is you get less people, or people doing less than they normally would do if the responsibility is all upon the individual. Under mercantilism and then the capitalism that replaced it, you are responsible for your own well-being, so you do as much as you can. If you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to do this much and other people will pick up the slack because we're all working together, you get less production overall because everybody else thinks somebody else is picking up their slack, and really you get more and more slack as a whole compared to if you have the individual accountability of, oh, I don't have anybody to pick up my slack, I got to do everything I can, you get more. So it's not just it's going from capitalism to socialism is taking a positive production, not just going to a neutral production, but going to a negative production because everybody's thinking somebody else is picking up the extra. And if you've ever worked on a group project, this always happened. You have 2 people out of a group of 10 or 5 that are pulling all of the weight, and you've got a bunch of dead weight because they're like, somebody else is going to help me through this. But if you have individuals working on individual assignments, yes, you will still have failures, but it's not going to be 2 people succeeding while 80% of your class fails. You're going to have the exact opposite. You're going to have like 2 people fail in your class while 80% of your class succeeds.
Sure, right. But
that's the difference.
to me, that brings us to a question of like human motivation and incentives, and what are the factors that drive those motivations and incentives. And my entire point is the reason why, say, Jamestown um, was more successful as a more hierarchical society than Plymouth Colony was, is because those people had already been attuned to living, like their motivation and incentives are already geared toward that way of living. Whereas the people who lived in Plymouth Colony probably had no experience living like that, and at any rate, it was not materially feasible for them to live like
I don't
that.
think you understand that both of them tried a similar system of combining all their stuff, and both of them nearly wiped themselves out.
Correct.
And
yeah.
then both of them the next year, well, William Bradford said, hey, whoever doesn't work doesn't eat. So they instituted a system of individual responsibility, whereas previously they tried group responsibility, and group responsibility doesn't work. But group responsibility is a fundamental premise of socialism, and it doesn't work ever. And the idea that it's a socialized thing, that group responsibility doesn't work, and that, hey, if we just get used to the habit of group responsibility working, eventually it will, that doesn't make any sense, because it's not actually, it's more biological than it is social when you're talking about individual responsibility versus group responsibility.
Well, I would argue that cooperation is as natural to human motivation as, like, individual, the motive to protect your own individual well-being. They're both powerful motivators of the human psyche, and they.
Okay, I guess I'll let you continue. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
Sorry, no, it's just that, like, those are the human psyche is a very multifaceted thing, and it can be motivated to act in certain ways given certain conditions, and those motivations can form habits in people which are more or less successful at producing the results that they want given the conditions that they live in. And my argument is that because those are the conditions that they had been, because that was largely the conditions that after Jamestown had essentially shifted its policy in terms of like food distribution and such, that was more attuned and in line with what the people of that colony, and it wouldn't have mattered if it was the people in Jamestown or the people in Plymouth. They were more attuned to living in that way, and it would make sense that they were more productive and that system was more stable. It would also make sense because there is less of, like, there's literally less abundance of the food or whatever it is that they're producing. And there's less labor power to produce that stuff than there would be in a modern industrial society, which is supposed to be the foundation for communism or socialism.
Okay. So
does that make sense? First of all,
because you're talking about this attunement thing, which just seems like filler words or intentionally to words chosen to intentionally make it less concise, or what's the word?
Like muddling it, sort of
muddling the
muddy
situation,
the water.
Because what does it mean to be they're more attuned to that? And you're like, how does one become more attuned to a system of things? It's like that's the natural way. It's not. It's not a more attunement. You cannot get more by. Okay, let me.
It almost sounds more like theory, more like theorizing.
It sounds like it's a theory that you can't exactly prove, but reality disproves your theory. So you can't prove it in any way because every example of where you should be able to prove your theory actually proves the opposite. And I don't get what you mean. So you're saying that they're not attuned to it, and they're more used to this type of system where individuals are responsible. But you made it sound as
Their
if
motivations are more aligned with a system that is set up that way. Yes.
but that's everybody's motivation. That is every human being's motivation from the beginning of time.
No, I
So
would
it's
argue that that's not true. It has been the case in a lot of people who live under capitalism and who have lived historically under any system which had the problem of scarcity. But the whole precondition to the theory of communism is that the whole precondition of the theory of communism is that you've done away with the problem of scarcity. That's why.
And that's a. Well, if we can just get rid of limitations on the physical environment, then socialism will work.
Right.
You can't ever get rid of scarcity. Because we live in a limited physical world. There will never be an end to scarcity, so then there will never be socialism. And
where's my Star Trek replicator?
Yeah.
My food replicator.
I would completely agree that if we can find some way to produce an infinite number of goods with a non-infinite number of inputs, then yes, socialism is where we're all going to be. The problem is, need is infinite, supply is not. You will never get rid of scarcity because supply...
Wait, how exactly is need infinite?
What?
How is there no upper limit to what humans will need?
Yeah,
there's an upper limit to how many humans there are.
Yeah, I don't think that it is infinite. Otherwise, I would never be able to satisfy myself in a given dinner.
No, that's a particular type of need.
Some of us can't remember.
That's not need overall. But you said that there's an upper limit to the number of humans. No, there isn't. So if
you don't think there's an upper limit to the number of humans?
There wouldn't be.
Why is there an upper limit to the material resources that humans can employ, but there's no upper limit to how many humans there can be?
You're talking about a post-scarcity society, in which case there is no upper limit to the number of humans because we have enough to supply any number of humans. That's it. If there are more humans than there is supply, then you no longer have you still have scarcity. That introduces scarcity. You're saying that there's a lack of scarcity, which means there's no amount of humans that could be introduced to the situation where we wouldn't be able to supply them.
Well, it's not even so much that I'm saying that. It's that humanity itself is materially limited in how it can reproduce itself. Humans can't just reproduce indefinitely until the end of time.
No, because we're limited by resources.
Well, right, but by
the introduction of the lack.
Wait, let Charlie finish this point.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was just it's not only we're not only limited in terms of economic resources, we're limited in terms of literally the number of atoms that could possibly comprise a human being. So we're limited in that way too. But it's a function to talk about getting rid of the problem of scarcity. It's yes, technically in terms of there will always be a finite number of resources in terms of what the universe physically allows for. But
I think that's the closest thing that we can get to infinite resources. If we could have very far out star travel to just explore the universe for light years and light years upon end, and just explore all these new different resources that all these planets and asteroids, etc., have to provide.
Right, and there's nothing about that that's contingent upon literal material infinity. It just has to be functionally infinite to the point where you literally, no matter, and again, this would be essentially impossible for a human to calculate where you would reach this point, but it's certainly not impossible or inconceivable that humans could reach a point where they're carrying out production of goods and services beyond the problem of scarcity, without actually interfering with the literal, material finitude of what is available to them. Because it's still, how would I articulate this exactly? The material resources that the universe supplies to humanity, I don't think could possibly. There's no way that human demand could exhaust that. And so, even though it is officially finite, it's functionally infinite in terms of the capacity for humans to demand that resource. And so that's what you're talking about when you get over the problem of scarcity. It's not literally that there are like the material, like the universe literally materially allows for an infinite number of resources. That's not what we're talking about. Just to be clear.
Okay, but like none of that solves the fundamental problem that I am seeing. Because so what happens is humans continually reproduce at an exponential rate. And scarcity is what reduces the amount of human reproduction. And if you're saying once we get to post-scarcity, it's like, well, that's the only thing limiting human reproduction. And so human reproduction will continue exponentially. And instead of having a population of 7-point-something billion like we currently do, you're talking about 700-point-something quadrillion across the universe, and it's expanding by several quadrillion.
Out for a whole like 10 seconds there.
Oh.
I couldn't hear you or anybody.
Okay, it's reconnected. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so but human populations will continue to increase as long as there are resources to support that increase. There has never been a time where human population did not increase, and you're talking about once we get to the furthest extents of the universe, we have, you know, unfettered access to the universe, the human population will suddenly, we're at 10 billion, we're good, we're not going to increase exponentially.
You sound quiet for some reason.
Yeah, S-Man sounds really quiet.
Oh, has he been talking?
Sometimes.
He talked a little bit earlier, and it sounded like that he was like 10 feet away from the mic.
So there's something you said earlier that I want to kind of go back to, because you were talking about individualism or individual interest versus cooperating, and I'm like, that's not that is a false dichotomy, because the individuals.
I'm sorry if you got that impression. I did not mean to present that as a dichotomy at all.
Okay, because that seems to be the flawed view of most socialists when they're like, oh, well, socialists work together and capitalists don't. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Capitalists work together more than any other group that we have ever seen in history. Socialists will divide and conquer. Capitalists will work with their enemies because it's in their long-term individual best interest.
I don't think you can make that claim universally. In what way were the... well, you could say that there are a number of ways you could present something as, well, we're working with these people, but, like, in what sense... actually, forget it. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm actually 15 minutes past the point where I said I had to go to bed.
Okay.
But, let's see, where should we close? Because there's still so much I want to get to.
Yeah, I mean, we can... we're not going to pick this up next week, but if you want to pick this up the week after that, like, I do streams every Tuesday. I will link you so you can come join us and we can finish this. But...
I'm sure we'll never finish, but...
yeah, I mean, we can continue to discuss these ideas.
Conversation, really.
Yeah, the idea... So, from what I've heard on this conversation, you've mentioned 3 or 4 things that seem like a fantasy as opposed to accepting reality. You talked about post-scarcity, which as if that is a possibility. And I'm like, well, if that were possible, well, then socialism wouldn't just be inevitable. It would be the only way to be. Because you can't give somebody something when they have enough of everything. There's no amount, like, hey, I will give you 5 ears of corn in replacement for the 5 ears of corn that you already have. You can't entice somebody if they have everything. But capitalism works on giving you
economic exchange should be carried out on that basis.
But capitalism, you wouldn't need economic exchange because capitalism is based on I'm providing you for something that is worth more than what you currently have because I think that what you have is worth more than I currently have.
or
in a post
function of a market economy. Yes.
in a post-scarcity economy, there's no amount that you could offer me that would be more than what I currently have, because I currently have everything I need. You can't offer me more than I need. It's not possible. So you limit, like, no trade would happen at all.
Right. But that's where the fundamental distinction in the character of production under socialism comes into play. And that's where it becomes relevant anyway, as it becomes distinct from capitalism, because at that point, things are not produced for the value at which they can be exchanged for other things. They're being produced for their use value. In fact, I've heard communism defined that way before. But we probably should put a bookmark in it in this conversation for now.
I want to say you haven't changed my mind, because this post-scarcity is a fantasy. Having the same outcomes in a socialist society that you have currently under a socialist society, having the same outcomes or the same access to resources under a socialist society that we currently experience in a capitalist society, that also seems like a fantasy to me.
Okay.
And the idea that you can achieve socialism without stopping capitalists in some way, because from my experience, in order for socialism to be socialism, everybody has to participate. And if you have some people who want to go off and do their own thing and be capitalists, those are the enemy, and then you have to go and eliminate them. So the fact that you think that capitalism can exist within your socialist society is counter to every logical conclusion from socialists.
I never made the claim that it could exist within a socialist society.
Which would mean that you would have to force capitalists.
No, because I think that it, and again, we're gonna have to get into the nitty gritty of this at another time. But I would argue that.
So I'm just that is my closing thing. Is I've said three things that make your argument or your position unattainable and undesirable for people.
I thought you had
I said three. The idea of scarcity, the idea that you could have the same resources or the same access to production under socialism that you can under capitalism, and the idea that you can have socialism despite capitalists wanting to have their capitalists. You can't have capitalism. You can't have your socialist utopia as long as capitalist exists. So those three things is like, as long as those three things hold true. Yeah, your ideology is not just unappealing; it doesn't seem even possible.
I heed.
Oh, okay, go on.
No, sorry, I'll let you go on. You haven't said anything yet.
I'll save what I want to say, like after you leave, I guess, so we don't drag your time out.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure then. I would heed all of those objections you have to my philosophy, and I'll have to, again, respond to them another time. But it has been quite enjoyable having this conversation. I thank you very much for having me here. Is this on your stream or S-Man's? Or both?
It should be on both.
Okay. I didn't even know it worked like that, but either way.
He's doing the stream through Hangouts, and I'm doing the stream through OBS. So OBS is recording my desktop and streaming it to my channel.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you to you both for having me here. Mm-hmm. Anybody who is listening can follow me on Twitter at Kotenru, KOTENRUU. And thanks for having me again. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you for being a polite guest. I've had other non-socialist guests who were actually advocating for socialist policies who have been very violent on my streams. So thank you for being cordial. And even though I disagree with you, you actually seem to actually understand what you're talking about, which is surprising considering most socialists I interact with don't even understand their own ideology, let alone anything about capitalism.
Hey, with you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, particularly when it comes to Owen's followers, I've always found Chuck, along with Lapis, to be like the gems of the group.
Oh, look, Owen doesn't really understand socialism. I mean, you're like, how do I understand your ideology better than you?
Anyway, I wanted to hear what Chuck wanted to say.
I was just going to say that I would, and I really don't want to throw shade at Owen either, especially in this company, but because we are friendly, but I would actually happen to agree with you. I don't agree with Owen's understanding of socialism. I don't think that his understanding of it could use some polishing, to say the least. But
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'll have to close with that.
Okay. Well,
Thank you
for
again,
joining
gentlemen,
us.
for having me.
It's nice talking to you, Chuck.
Likewise. Take care.
Wait, his name is Chuck? I'm calling him Charles
Charlie
this
Green.
whole time.
Nickname him Chuck. But anyway, what I wanted to say a bit earlier was you said convert all the capitalists to become socialists. That's the only way that they would attain their socialist utopia. I mean, if you want like a non-government induced socialism, well then yeah, but it's either through that or capitalists can believe it would be forced by the government to partake in socialism, like share their goods to even
Yeah.
the ladies of society, etc.
In which case, capitalists would oppose that as theft of their property. Like, hey, you
Right.
Yeah, that's and so, yeah, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be the government imposing. It could just be society. Is like, you got the mob with pitchforks. Hey, give us your stuff. Hey, you're not participating in this society. You're not contributing. You're evil. For socialism to be socialism, everybody has to give to the community. Otherwise, it's not socialism. If you have somebody living in a society and not contributing, they are the enemy. If they are not, well, I mean, contributing according to socialists. Like if you're a capitalist and you are trading with a socialist, that's not contributing. In order to be a socialist, you have to give all your stuff so that way, yeah. Socialists, yeah,
I'm glad that you were like able to have a decent
yeah.
hangout call with Charlie because I mean obviously you and I have different perceptions regarding Lapis, and she and I have different perceptions of you.
Yeah,
But
I think you just used the wrong pronoun there, buddy.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an unnecessary S at the beginning of that. Yeah. Alright.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can feel free to share this with Lapis. Yeah, there's.
No, I have it. I have that
you're cutting
bit
out.
of
Hello?
testing 1 2 3.
Alright, there it goes.
All right. So anyway, I have enough respect to at least give that amount of credence.
Yeah,
To
so
her.
and so when I've talked with, like I said, when I talked with other socialists, I'm like, dude, you have obviously not read your source material. You don't know what, like I like you say that I am ignorant of the subject. And I'm like, I mean, granted, my ability to quote is rather lacking because I think more in abstract, and so it's easier for me to remember like large concepts as opposed to individual facts or exact verbiage, although the phrase from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs, pretty easy to remember and is quoted almost like ad nauseum by socialists, and you're like, well, that's the central mantra and it does embody what their philosophy is. And so I can talk about these things in abstracts, but so there's some socialists who will beat me on like physical details and it was like the year that these things occurred and all that sort of thing. But when you're talking about overall concepts, I'm like, dude, how did you not remember that from your own ideology and your own belief system? That's core. How can you think that I know, like a lot of them don't understand it and they're just repeating what their professors or whoever have told them, and I'm like, you've never actually studied the material yourself, which is readily apparent because you don't understand that Marx did call for revolution, and at least he was willing to admit that. And I'm like, that's something I've talked to socialists and they didn't even. I'm like, no, that was his. Whether it was his prescription or whether he thought it was necessary, like a necessary evil or something like that, is a little ambiguous. But when you're telling me he didn't even acknowledge a revolution, and you think you're a socialist, I'm like, dude, read your source material.
Marx did advocate for a violent revolution?
So whether he advocated for it or not is up for debate, and I've seen the argument. I'm kind of okay, yeah. To me, it sounds like he is advocating for revolution, but it's also could be possible that he's saying a revolution is unavoidable. It sounds like he's saying this is the way things are going to lead, and so whether he's saying that we need it to go that way or that we just have to accept that it's going that way, that's up for debate. But the fact that he's saying, okay, revolution, yes, this is part of the process. A lot of people are like, oh no, we can do this peacefully, and I was like, no, never in the history of anything, even by your own God King's admission, it can't be done peacefully. So, I mean, you're like, oh, he's right about everything, but he's wrong about that. And I'm like, well, then it's possible that he's wrong about everything. So they don't like to admit that he could be wrong about everything because they're like, no, he's right about 99%, but this 1% where he's saying you can't do it peacefully, oh, he's wrong about that. And I'm like, well, somebody who can be wrong once can be wrong more than once. I just... And the rest of your ideology depends on him not being wrong about anything else.
What was I gonna say? Did you hear what I said earlier regarding Vladimir Lenin?
No.
What? Like, would he be? Like, it seems as if he was the primary person that inspired the idea of revolution to attain socialism / communism.
No, it was in Marx's writings before Lenin.
Well, okay, but you just said that was kind of that's
No, because the Marx was dead before anybody actually implemented his ideas. So at that point, all of his writings were already there. He had died. What is it? I'll look up the time frames here because.
I mean, because I thought I heard you say that it was kind of questionable as to whether Karl Marx did actually advocate for a revolution a little bit earlier in this stream.
Yeah. So whether he's saying it, we should do a revolution, or whether a revolution is necessary. So that, like, it's a little difficult. Because I've seen the arguments and I'm like, yeah, given the way it is phrased, it's a little ambiguous, as if he's saying, rise up and we start the revolution, as opposed to, well, the only way we're going to get there is a revolution is going to happen, as if he's kind of saying, well, I guess we have to, as opposed to, we need to, we must, come on, rise up. So I tend to read it as let's rise up against the bourgeoisie, and to me it sounds like a very violent call to arms, but other people are saying, nope, he's just acknowledging that this is going to happen, as opposed to saying it needs to happen.
Well, then Vladimir Lenin took a powder keg to that idea.
Yeah, so Vladimir Lenin was definitely calling for, he's saying, yeah, we have to have a violent revolution. That seems pretty clear. Yeah, but see, Marx died in 1883, and Lenin was born in 1870. So unless Lenin started his revolution in 83, unless Lenin started his revolution at the age of 13, that's... Yeah, he didn't even get to the governmental position until 1917. So...
What was Vladimir Lenin right before he had led the Bolsheviks to overthrow?
I am not sure.
Well, I know that.
I know he was a party leader, but I don't know if he.
Well, I know that Karl Marx was a lazy ass wannabe newspaper writer.
Yep. Who got a maid pregnant and then kicked her to the curb because he cares about the poor.
Yeah, I mean, pretty abusive to his
Oh.
wife primarily, and I don't know about how negatively he might have treated his kids or grandkids or whatever. I can't remember that, but anyway, there's like
Okay.
this one video that was shared to me called "Marx the Man," which was a chapter from Thomas Sowell's one of Thomas Sowell's books, I guess it
Mhm.
was, and it was quite insightful as to how pitiful Karl Marx of an individual Karl Marx was. Like he was a real moocher.
Oh yeah.
He is
And which
the
so it seems as if he was advocating these policies because he's like, well, this would be good for me if you guys just gave me all your stuff and I never had to do anything. It's like, oh, I'm doing all I can for the society. I'm providing these ideas, and you guys just provide me with the food and and all the stuff that I. Sounds like what he was.
yeah.
Yeah, he's like, oh, see, you guys are providing all the manual labor. I'm doing all the heavy lifting.
Hey, I got a question, by the way, unrelated to economics.
Okay, before you start that, so Lenin was exiled because he was spouting Marxist ideology and so was kicked out and then came back in with a group of basically violent mercenaries in order to start the Bolshevik Revolution. But prior to that, he got his law degree, and he came from a wealthy middle class family. So I'd never even bothered to look at Lenin's history as far as what he did prior to assuming authority. But yeah, so basically he came from a wealthy family, and they paid his way through law school, and he was indoctrinated while in college.
So much so to become a leader of the ideology he was indoctrinated in.
I mean that's just the Wikipedia stuff, so I haven't done in-depth research on what he did prior to the revolution.
I saw the reflection off your glasses.
Yeah, but from what I could tell is they didn't mention anything about any kind of job or employment prior to starting his activist Marxism. Okay, so what was your question?
Yeah, I mean it's been quite a while since you and I had actually talked on stream, honestly. So I think the last time we had talked was even before this thing that I'm about to mention.
Okay,
which
I got a quick point of clarification because you just said honestly. So have you been lying to me the previous time we've been on stream together?
Oh god. But anyway.
Oh, I do need to look up the population Israel thing because I'm pretty sure that the amount of Jews is now larger as a percentage than it used to be.
So anyway, we hadn't talked to each other ever since before this had went down. What I'm about to mention, and what I wanted to get your opinion on was Sargon of Akkad's recent meltdown, his downfall that kind of started with him calling Jim Medicare a child groomer.
Well, I am not all that familiar with the Sargon versus Medicare, but without knowing the details, I can guarantee you, you don't want to mess with Medicare. If it is a battle of wits, Sargon is unarmed when compared to Medicare. I don't know if it's all a show or if he's got other people helping him out, but the amount of consistency and his analysis ability is second to none from what I've seen on YouTube. It's like I haven't done anything to be in his crosshairs, but if I had, I'd be like, dude, don't let Medicare find out about this because once he focus in on a target, it's like, okay, this guy's up to something, dude. He's like a bloodhound. I guess maybe that's a better way of saying it.
Oh yeah.
So if he is having a dispute with Sargon, it's because Sargon's up to some shit, doing some shady something or other. I mean, it might not be something like.
I think originally it did not start off as anything controversial. Really, it was just Jim poking fun at Sargon of Akkad wanting to join UKIP, and compared the way that he was dressing. Like he had like a black outer suit, wearing like a purple button-up shirt inside that with a purple tie or something like that, and he called him like an Applebee's waiter. Medicare called Sargon of Akkad his look the equivalent to an Applebee's waiter, and Sargon got so butthurt with it that he like did a full stream responding to some stuff of Jim's, and halfway through, without any evidence at all, called him a child groomer. And this is kind of what pissed me off about Sargon, because he's always like lambasting feminists for baselessly accusing people of being rapists, racists as well, but rapists primarily, like the whole Kavanaugh situation, for example. And yet here you got a guy that is baselessly making accusations towards Jim Medicare of being supposedly one step down from a pedophile.
Yeah, so as far as I know, there is no basis for that, and considering Medicare's like relentless pursuit of these types of people and exposing their, I'm like,
yeah, like for example, him versus Ross.
Yeah, the level of, because when he built a case against someone, he just compounds the evidence against that individual. I mean, I don't know if he's a lawyer in real life or what, but I'm like, if this was something brought before court, like that jury'd be like, jury goes out to deliberation. Nope, we don't need it. Here's our verdict. Like they don't even need to go outside of the room, or if they do, it's for like 5 minutes. I'm like, dude, yeah, that Medicare, he's right. And he has been exposing all of these creeps, and sometimes he's just exposing people's hypocrisy, and it's laughable and that sort of thing. It's just like, this guy's a dope. This guy's, but when he gets his teeth into it, usually it's like, dude, this guy's got some skeletons in his closet for serious. So I mean, as far as I know, it doesn't seem like Medicare did that with Sargon. It seemed Medicare was just pointing out the silliness and hypocrisy in Sargon, which he's, Medicare has that troll tendency sometimes too. But
I don't even know the full story of what Jim was going on regarding Sargon. All that I knew was he made an Applebee's waiter comment, and then all this happened.
Yeah,
that caused me to like be so disappointed in Sargon that I unsubbed from him. I even made a video ranting about
him for a while.
What?
I think I've been unsubbed from Sargon for a while because he's been very. He's got a lot of contradictory, I guess, arguments or positions, and when people call him out on it, he's he dodges or I'm like, dude, that's I can't. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he needs to be deplatformed or anything, but he definitely does not seem to be consistent on his beliefs and what he's trying to convince other people of. And I'm like, dude, if you're not consistent on anything, how can you expect other people to be consistent? And yet, like, half of his platform is, pointing out hypocrisy on the SJWs and silly things that leftists do that are contradictory or damaging. And I'm like, but you're not consistent, so your argument falls flat because you're holding them to a standard you don't hold to yourself to, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
So, because it seems rather odd that he was like, I don't know who was he debating? Oh, he was debating Adam Kokesh, and he's trying to defend government while also defending the UK's he's defending governments overall, while trying to hold his we just went off the air on SB.
I mean, he came back in. I couldn't tell what he said because he was so muffled right there, and then he just immediately left. Like, hope he's all right.
All right. Well, and since this conversation has gone away from me talking with Charlie there, I'm gonna go ahead and end that stream. So thank you guys for joining me for the second stream, and there will be no stream next week if anybody's actually here. I don't know. It says peak concurrent is 2. That might be you having a stream open. Anyway, But thanks for joining me. No stream next week, but there will be a stream on January 1st. And then I am not sure if I will be able to stream after that, depending on how long it takes for me to move and how long, or what the setup is like at my, because I will be in school for 10 to 12 weeks. And I don't know what the, I mean, I'm sure I'll have access to the internet, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to set up and do a live stream, depending on the dorm setup and stuff like that. I call it school, but I don't know what exactly the environment's going to be like, because it's training for my job, and I'm assuming it's going to be similar to a university setting. At least that's the impression I keep getting. All right, so at least I will do a stream on the 1st. I don't know when the next stream will be after that, but I will have more details by the 1st.
I just want to make one more comment. I do like the title that you given to this stream.
All right, thank you.
I mean, it kind of sums up the motives of, especially the most deep end of far leftists, you know.
Yeah, and I mean that's the comment that Charlie was replying to was about socialists hate these groups and hate these groups, and it's like, yeah, it's if you boil it down, it's not a love for their ideology or their beliefs or thinking that their belief is superior. It's just a hatred towards capitalism and Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a hatred for everything that they are not.
Yeah. But
so
with Chuck,
so they don't love the poor; they hate the rich, and that seems to be pretty. Oh, I lost my
yeah,
screen there.
I kind of think that maybe Charlie, that he legitimately is like a well-intent, or at least that's the impression that I get, anyways. That he does not like hate the rich per se. That he might legitimately care about the poor, but with somebody like Owen, for example, I really, really question whether or not they're like truly good intent or not.
Well, I'm questioning whether Charlie is actually a socialist. That's what I'm like. Cause that like, as we went on, I'm like, well, sounds like you don't agree with any of the things that would make you a socialist. But we'll hash that out next time we talk. So, I mean, I don't want to. But my impression is that.
Grill him.
Yeah, my impression is that he thinks he's a socialist, but it's like, well, every capitalist would be a socialist if they believed that post-scarcity was possible. I was like, if we ever get to that point, you don't need capitalism. So I was like, oh, dude, yeah, and every single capitalist, because they are focused on efficiency, like, hey, I want more for less. If you get to a post-scarcity society, you can't get better than an infinite amount of stuff for nothing, which is what post-scarcity implies. It's not the ease of doing things. It's like hey, I have whatever I want and I don't need to work unless I want to. That's post-scarcity, which means whatever you want and no effort on your end. That's the capitalism dream. If we could get to that point, capitalism would be like, yes, mission accomplished, guys. And that's what socialists claim will be the ultimate future. And I'm like, hey, if it's possible to get there, we're all for it. I'm like, but I don't think it's possible. So I think ultimately he's not a socialist, but he just doesn't understand that those things might be impossible. I think he's more of an idealist than a socialist. I'm like, well, if you ever accept that those things are not physically possible, I don't think you will be a socialist anymore. All right, and I'm going to stop the stream there, and thank you guys for joining me. See you 2 weeks from now.
All right.